Okay, so this is part two to my greatest horror films of the 1970s video. And where I left off was with the movie Jaws. Now, Jaws, as I had previously said, was the first summer blockbuster film. Really did well at the box office and definitely launched, the career of Steven Spielberg. That is for sure, But Jaws, in a lot of ways, truly was a terrifying film. I mean, people were afraid to go into the water after seeing a movie like that. And just the way they showed the shark attacking people and the water getting red and all that really brought a lot of terror to anybody who was, near water after that film came out. Now, Jaws, although you could call it a horror movie, you could also in some ways consider Jaws to be an action-adventure as well. I mean, you could make the argument that it is an action-adventure, but did think it was a terrifying film in a lot of ways. And it followed that, 1950s kind of monster movie format where, you see little bits and pieces of the monster throughout the movie and don't really see, the full monster until the end of the film. And, that's, how Jaws was made. And the next movie I want to talk about was done in a very similar way. And that's why I want to talk about it next. And that would be Alien. Now, Alien, although sometimes labeled a science fiction movie, is really a horror film. And much like Jaws, the creature is, picking off people one by one. You don't really see the creature until the final showdown at the end of the movie. And, Alien definitely was a great film and, a favorite to many people to this day. Next film that I wanted to talk about was Last House on the Left. Now, I first saw Last House on the Left when I was in college. And to be honest with you, when I first saw it, I didn't like it. In fact, I remember my roommate and myself saw Last House on the Left, and then at the end we both kind of, looked at each other like, what the hell did we just watch? But you have to, give Wes Craven some credit for the way he made this film. I mean, the film has that very creepy kind of Technicolor kind of look to it, and the crackle, and because it's so cheaply made like that, that adds to the quality of the terror that you get from the horror film. There's no, monsters in the movie, there's no aliens, but instead the movie in a lot of ways is more realistic, because what a lot of people do fear are home invaders, and that's what the film deals with. You have that crazy character, Krug in the film, and really there's some attributes to this character, and what makes him such a horrible bad guy is because you can tell that seems kind of real in a lot of ways. But yeah, so Last House on the Left, Wes Craven's first movie, and you can understand why it was his first movie, because I guess there was conventional wisdom that would kind of go around that if you were a filmmaker and you were starting your first film project, you probably would want to make it a horror film because you had a good shot of that film making it pretty big, because like I said before, films like Halloween, which was an independent film, ended up making it really big. So a lot of filmmakers would start out with making a horror film and whatnot, because it seemed to be kind of a winning formula. Okay, next movie is a film called Let's Scare Jessica to Death. Now, Let's Scare Jessica to Death is not a very well-known film. It's a film that involves this woman and a man, and they go somewhere like around New York. It might be Long Island. And they move into this area, and immediately this woman starts seeing, apparitions and ghosts and all kinds of strange things. And you never know if the woman is actually seeing these things or if there's, something wrong with her, if she's insane. You just really don't know. And a lot of strange things happening throughout the movie. I mean, the woman just happens to run into some woman who's like up in the attic, and they have like a friendly conversation, and then the person leaves, and you're like, well, how did that person end up there? So yeah, it's one of those movies that has some like weird things in it like that. But yeah, Let's Scare Jessica to Death. I do recommend it. Like I said, not a very well-known film. The next film is more well-known. Even the sequels are pretty well-known, and that's the movie Phantasm. Now, Phantasm has a lot of similarities to like kind of an Italian horror film. I guess the guy who made it made some like kind of like kids movies before this, and one of them was called Kenny and Company. But then decided to make a horror film, and Phantasm was the result. And definitely some eerie things in this movie. You have that ball and that like mausoleum. You have the kid who goes into the cemetery and sees, the tall man taking graves and bringing them, I think, like somewhere into the mausoleum. And then from what I remember, I believe they're like transported to like another dimension. But of course, there were other Phantasm films. It has some cool music in it. I will admit to that. There's definitely some good music. Next movie after that would be The Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Now, I'll confess, I just saw The Texas Chainsaw Massacre just a mere 2 years ago for the first time. There've been some remakes and some sequels, and none of that's really good, but the original truly is terrifying. I mean, even when the movie starts, it's scary. It starts with that, like, weird, eerie sound. And then you see, like, a flash on these, like, bodies and stuff. I mean, I don't even know what that noise even is, but, definitely scared the hell out of me, whatever it was. But, and then, a lot of, again, eerie imagery in the movie. I think it was shot in the hill country where it's kind of desolate. And I know this movie, is considered to be pretty scary because, again, kind of like Last House on the Left, it's one of those movies that are terrifying because in a lot of ways, it does seem kind of real, and it does seem like something that could kind of happen. In some ways, I would say the movie has some similarities to movies like The Hills Have Eyes or Deliverance, where, you sort of have these characters who live out in the middle of nowhere and are sort of like cut off from the rest of society. And so, yeah, I mean, it definitely, shares those characteristics for sure. And like I said, definitely a terrifying movie. The next film that I picked was Phantom of the Paradise. Phantom of the Paradise, very 70s looking film. It stars, I'm trying to think who was in it again. It does have Paul Williams in it, and Paul Williams is a kind of a famous songwriter, wrote for like Barbra Streisand, and wrote like Rainbow Connection for the Muppets. So yeah, he was like a songwriter. He's kind of like the main bad guy in this movie. This Phantom of the Paradise, it is a Brian De Palma film, and would be considered kind of like a mid-70s like kind of rock film. And you sort of had that in the mid-70s, kind of like a Rocky Horror Picture Show in a way. And then the Phantom himself kind of, and I know this was brought up in another video, but I'm going to repeat it, but kind of looks sort of like Marilyn Manson in a way. But yeah, definitely an interesting film. Definitely a film worth checking out at least once if you haven't seen it. So yeah, Phantom of the Paradise, kind of, and I should add, it's kind of like a combination. The movie's kind of like a combination of, was it Faust, Dorian Gray, and Phantom of the Opera, intermixed with like rock music of the time. So yeah, if you're into that kind of thing, you'd like the movie. Next one would be The Fury. Now, The Fury is also a Brian De Palma movie, and it has some similarities to those kinds of like movies with people with psychic abilities that just have the person's first name in the title, like Carrie or Lucy or Patrick or Jennifer. There's a number of movies like that. The Fury's kind of like one of those movies. It starts out kind of like a spy thriller. It has Kirk Douglas in it, and then midway through the movie it switches and it becomes more of a horror film where you deal with these like kids with these psychic abilities in that, kind of like what Carrie has, like telekinetic powers and that. But definitely a good movie, definitely worth checking out, especially if you like nostalgia, because this film, or at least part of it, was, it was filmed like throughout the Chicago area, and they do show the old Chicago Mall, which is no longer there. So, if you like nostalgia like me, you definitely would appreciate that. Oh, and also, I should add, The Fury also has the acting debut of Daryl Hannah in it as well. So, next movie that I want to talk about is a film called Magic. Now, Magic was a Anthony Hopkins film. Anthony Hopkins, Faye Dunaway, and Burgess Meredith. So, what the movie kind of deals with is this character who is like a ventriloquist, and he has this like this dummy mannequin, and the dummy mannequin is kind of like telling him to do terrible things, and he's listening to it. And like Let's Scare Jessica to Death, you never know if it's all in his mind or if it's really happening. So that's another good film from the 70s, I'd have to say. Another film that I would like to add is a film called The Demon Seed. Now, I made another whole review on the film, The Demon Seed. It was, based on a Dean Koontz novel, and, deals with this computer that takes over a guy's house and impregnates a guy's wife, so the computer could download its consciousness onto the fetus and then be born and then live a human life, because otherwise it would be condemned for all eternity inside of its casing. So that's kind of a strange film. Definitely one to check out as well if you haven't seen it. Like I said, based on a Dean Koontz novel. So yeah, that's all I have. There are tons of great films that came out in the 70s. Ones I haven't even seen. If you notice, there are some films that I did not mention. One of them is The Exorcist. And the reason why I didn't mention The Exorcist is I actually feel that film is overrated. I really do. I didn't really find it, the film all that scary and frightening. I know some people did, but I don't know. Maybe it could be because people think it's so scary because other people think it's so scary, and in some ways certain parts of it have kind of become cliche in the culture. Maybe that's why. So I didn't really care for that like a whole lot. Thought that was kind of overrated. I know there might be some disappointed people, watching this. How could you say that? But it's just my opinion. Next is, The Omen. The Omen was pretty good, but I think I like The Omen 2 actually better. That was filmed like in the Chicago area and around like Lake Geneva and all that. But The Omen was alright, not really too big into that film. But, when you do talk about 1970s films, a lot of time, horror films, a lot of times people do bring up The Omen. That's one you always, will hear people talk about time and time again. Also some other films I didn't mention, like in the 70s you also had like a lot of, and this was because of the popularity of Jaws, you had a lot of those kind of like killer animals films like Piranha, Grizzly, Night of the Lepus, Day of the Animals. You got like all these like killer animal movies in the 70s. And a lot of that I think had to do with the popularity of Jaws. But yeah, so again, a lot of great horror films came out in that decade. It's truly the golden age. I believe it's the golden age of filmmaking, period. But it's also, the 70s is also the golden age of the horror film, that's for sure. So many good movies coming out. But, yeah, so that's all I have to say. I hope you enjoyed my video.